Welcome to Talking Tuesday. I am your host, Fancy Quant, and today I would like to talk about legends. So this is something that's been coming up in the back of my mind for a while now. I've been thinking about this, about, what defines a legacy. There is that statement, legends never die. And part of me wants to be in that boat where it's like, you leave on some sort of legacy here. You did something great while you were here, but you left something that's so impactful, so meaningful that it leaves, a lasting impression on society and on how things have gone, kind of throughout quant finance and the real world. And there's a lot of people, that are kind of legends, but I think we often forget. So to start this off, I thought we should start with Fischer Black. I mean, given this podcast is typically about quantitative finance, I thought we would go through a few different people, talk about the characteristics, and then talk about at the end of this, how do you leave a lasting impression in general, but also in the quantitative finance space, because there's a little bit of juggling of which direction you should be headed and what you should be doing. So Fischer Black is known for the Black-Scholes model. I don't think, though, that is probably his best contribution. He has other great contributions, a lot of his books about economic theory, his writings, his musings. As you kind of learn more about Fischer Black, there's a book by Perry Merling, which is on Fischer Black's life. He talks a little bit about it. Again, Perry's an economist. But as you read about Fischer Black, you start to realize he's more or less like an economist. He's tied into again, I think he has a PhD in mathematics, but he's tied into finance, and he's tied into economic theory and equilibriums and putting all these pieces together. And one of the surprising things that he mentioned was that, a society would be cashless. And he started going through this process. Now, I mentioned this today, and, young kids think well, who cares? Obviously, it's going to be cashless. This was back in the 80s, though. And so when you start to think about this, right, we were writing checks. We would have, I don't have it with me, but I had a checkbook, and you would get it out and you would write on the check, the amount. And when I have to write a check even today, I absolutely hate doing it because I feel like I'm going to screw something up. But it's pretty straightforward, but you got to actually write out the dollar values in English, and you put the date. Typically there's a little note at the bottom, you put what it's for, and then you sign the check and, you process this. And back when he was making these sort of predictions on this, it wasn't okay, I'm going to predict this and try to be right. It was how he saw the economy evolving, how he saw technology and efficiencies within an economic framework. Even the Black-Scholes option derivative pricing model, he comes from the CAPM, which is the financial perspective of this. So anyways, he's done a ton in the finance space. Almost every kind of writing you find on him, it says he was operating in some other space. There was no one near him. Many people today even argue he's probably the brightest mind to have ever been in finance. And again, when you start to read through a lot of his material and work, interestingly enough, he comes at it from an economic perspective, which is very odd because today's modern finance, quant finance space seems very anti-economics. Now, we're not going to go down that rabbit hole. I would agree that economics as a whole has kind of taken a left turn. But even back then, it was not the area to be. Finance always tends to be the premier area to work in. And yet Fischer Black kind of worked in this space of finance and economics by applying mathematics and statistics, which more or less is quant finance. I would argue that's probably one of the founding contributors to quant finance. Often I will mention him as the father of quantitative finance, just because it seems like he has kind of put all the pieces finally together. The Black-Scholes kind of solidifies this and makes this, I don't know, the capstone of the career here, what most people kind of think of here. And then we start going into other individuals like Peter Carr. So Peter Carr passed away here a couple years ago. Now, again, I had the honor of actually interviewing him and working with him. But again, as I start to look at this and we look at Peter Carr's life, the interesting thing is that he had, a lot of work done in the stochastic kind of space here of quant finance as well. But that's not the commonality that everyone talked about after he passed. And even today, when I'll mention his name, the thing that comes up is, oh, Peter Carr, he was excellent. He was always there for people. And then everyone has a story. So it's oh, he took the time out, and they explain they're walking on the street in New York City, and they ran into him and they knew who he was and they asked him, a career question or an academic question or something. And it's he took the time to actually help the individual out and give some advice and kind of work with them a little bit. And for those of you outside of the quant space here, to give you kind of a perspective of this, quants don't help other quants. Quants don't like to talk about a lot of other people in general. I'm going to put quants out here in the term of those actually building models, not those doing trading, not those in finance that have the title they slap on there, which I see consistently. I'm talking people that are actually digging into like deep levels of theoretical math, that are really, getting into the statistics behind it and, really working with even like the optimization a bit, the programming piece of it. Those that are really deep into the process here, and many students reach out to me and say, Dimitri, I've emailed 20 people, 20 practitioners on LinkedIn, or I've emailed students from these programs and nobody responds. And that's, I think, what made Peter Carr shine so much, is that he was so different from the rest of the crowd in the sense that he was bright like the rest of the quants, but he made good contributions in publications and the papers he wrote, the intellectual ads he did with all these different types of models and theories and writings and teachings. So he taught at NYU. Again, I think this added to his legacy that made him a legend here, is that he's, interacting with more and more and more people, and you're having these ties and connections and relationships. And even on the student level, it's not like I've contacted people in the quant finance space. And even, today is who I am and where I kind of sit in that spectrum where people are like, oh, I'm too busy. I don't have time. I don't have time to chat with you. I don't have time to answer questions, or they just don't answer. Like they just won't respond. And again, you think about that, like Peter Carr just taking the time out to help students, practitioners, like he really did a large contribution in what kind of, I think, defined his legacy. Again, was his ability to work with people here, and his willingness to kind of share his time. Now, you look back at Fischer Black, on the other hand, I don't know a lot about his contributions on, helping people and whatnot, but I will note here that one of the things that he worked when he was at Goldman Sachs, at least in his book, he mentions towards the end of his career, he was also running some investments for clients as well. Also working at Goldman Sachs, we had all these special requirements. But a lot of people in the bank didn't like him towards the end because it was like they couldn't clearly see how it was adding value. And I think this is a problem that quants, struggle with a lot. Even I struggle with it today, which is, I'm building this model, or I'm, solving this unique problem that requires math and stats, and we're trying to come up with a solution for it. And if you can't deliver clear, easy to use value like instantly, people often write you off as like, oh, it's worthless. I mean, like risk management is probably one of these top areas. People, screw risk management. We don't need risk management. We're making tons of money without them. We got it under control. We see everything, and then everything blows up. But Fischer Black in that piece too, I think that kind of looking at it from that spectrum here is like, he was, I think, different from Peter Carr in that sense that obviously he was loved and liked by those around him and the people that worked with him, probably one-on-one. But when you look at like firm-wide, I think a difference between Fischer Black and Peter Carr was Peter Carr was more charismatic, as Fischer Black perhaps was a little bit more academically rigorous and focused and not so worried about, I don't know, kind of the personal perspective of it. Again, I don't really know because I never actually met Fischer Black. I was just a kid when he passed away. But again, going off kind of the readings and looking at different perspectives and, getting kind of his life story out, at least out of his book there. And then the third person I'm going to mention is not a quant and is not even past, but has a massive legacy behind them. And this is going to be Rick Rubin. Now, this might surprise many of you. So if you don't know who Rick Rubin is a famous, I guess, music producer. He's worked with a bunch of people, I think like Johnny Cash, and even like people like he's super interesting. I'll put a link below on some documentaries or discussions or interviews with him. He's just really fascinating. But I would argue he's a legend in the sense, if you look at his career, he always says, I'm not a musician. Right? I'm not there to write the music. I'm not there to be the one doing that. But he takes musicians and artists and he brings out the best work inside of them. And so I think in many ways, Rick Rubin, his magical shine, his legacy, the legend that he will leave behind, I think will be huge in the music industry forever. I think it'll always be there. It'll always be this massive impact, because you always hear about, like an artist and they spawned this type of music, which spawned this other type of, artist. And it like people start kind of like tracing out how the music kind of came back to some sort of origin with this. Rick Rubin's that really unique guy that he's not just working in one industry. So he worked in the rap industry for a while. with some musicians in that space. And then he worked with some people in the rock industry. And I know he's worked with like Johnny Cash. I think he was helping like revive his career a bit. And then he was working with, so one of my favorites, Mac Miller, who's a musician as well, who passed away here a little while ago. But again, when you watch the documentaries, you learn so much about his process. Rick Rubin's a legend because he's able to take artists and musicians. He has this really unique skill of taking them and helping them relax and helping them tap into who they really are as a person, pull out what's unique, and get them to kind of work towards making really meaningful and interesting music. And when you start to figure out who he worked with, there's usually someone in that group you're like, oh, I love that artist, or I love that song, and he was actually a part of kind of working with that artist and getting them to that point here. So Rick Rubin, I think, stands out in that uniqueness again here. We start thinking about, again, going back to Fischer Black and Peter Carr. Again, they had to have some sort of larger contribution to the industry that they're in. But there also seems to be something extra, something that makes them quite unique. Again, Fischer Black's ability to argue and articulate ideas, again, boiling down the Black-Scholes in the way that he did, it's groundbreaking. Like the way he thinks about finance, the way he thought about economics. Again, people still disagree with it, but it's an interesting, unique perspective. It kind of defines him and put him in another league above everybody else. When you talked about Peter Carr again, he was doing research that was quite well known. So he was doing things that were above and beyond most average people. And then I think what really kind of solidified his legacy was going to be the personal touch, the attribute, the teaching, the giving back piece of this. And then Rick Rubin, we look at, I don't know how he's doing it either, but he just brings the best out of other people here. So again, there seems to be different angles. There's nothing consistent per se. Working with people is great. Being excellent in your field is great. But you have to have something unique to really, set it off here. And one other person who's been on my mind quite a bit lately, I actually have their book with me, Gilbert Strang. So he has a book on linear algebra. He recently retired from MIT, and he has even free online learning courses. And so I picked up this book because it was just like a highly recommended linear algebra book. I had no idea who Gil Strang was. And so I started reading this book and I was like, oh, this book is so good. The thing I like about it the most is he writes like I write, and I like to write like I talk. So I don't write very formally. It's like someone sitting there and explaining something to you on the paper, and there's little funny notes of this doesn't really need to be proved because, this is overly, you don't get much out of it. But, here's an example of that. He writes the books that way. And then I found out he was doing his last official lecture. He's the longest teaching professor at MIT's math department, and they think maybe even the whole university. He taught for a very, very long time. And again, his book, I just love his book. So I'm thinking this guy's got to be, 40, 45 years old. And then I find out he's, already retiring. He's towards the end of his career. He's taught a very, very long, successful career path. And I watched his last lecture, and it was just really enjoyable. It's the way he talks, the way he kind of interacts. He has a very, relaxed setting. And you can tell he loves what he's teaching here. So that was interesting. And then, of course, as people are posting on LinkedIn, they're like, oh, he wrote the first textbook on this topic. And he has these other textbooks. And then he was on the Lex Friedman. I didn't watch the full interview. I'll link it below as well if you're interested. But I watched parts of it before. And it's who he is, just it really excites me. And it started me thinking, he's going to leave behind this whole legacy here. Now, where on the spectrum of legend should you put him? And the fact that I think that, a lot of people aren't going to know who they are, but they have these massive contributions. And so when you look at his online teaching presence, again, giving back to some sort of community, in this case, anyone taking linear algebra or his other courses on there. I've been watching his linear algebra series. It's an open courseware MIT project. But it's great. It's excellent. And then I start to wonder when I look at his work and I look at all the people that posted and discussed about it, and people are like, oh, that was my advisor's advisor. And this book made such an impact on my life. And this changed, my trajectory or my career or how I think about problems. Again, I think Gil kind of goes back to the Fischer Black piece a little bit, in the fact that he seems to understand the ideas so crystal clear. His teaching style is it's excellent. Like, I just love his teaching style. If I would have had him as a teacher in college, I'm sure I would have, been more drawn to the mathematics at an undergrad level instead of taking the finance route. But again, I start to wonder now. I'm like thinking, like, oh, I want to buy all his other textbooks. I want to read them, even if they're topics I've already taken, and even if they're things I've already learned. It's looking at it through the eyes of somebody else, especially somebody who's an expert and a kind of an industry legend. I can't talk up him enough. I haven't even had that much time to really dig into a lot of his work either. So I don't even know if he has publications or what he worked on in that sense. But again, it's having that impact. It's seeing the people react. And when he retired, there was tons and tons of people on YouTube that attended his last lecture, which was just live from MIT. And then just to throw out two more names here, just because I think they're people that are very deserving of the space. And probably many of you have not heard them if you aren't in the stats, finance, quant finance space. One being George Box. So George Box has had a massive impact on my career. So many people probably don't know that. He was born in 1919 in the UK. He died in 2013 in Madison, Wisconsin. Again, I had no idea who he was. I'd heard of his name a little bit in the textbooks in 2011, 2012, 2013, somewhere in there. But again, he is famously known for doing a lot in statistics. Like, he is like one of the largest, most impactful names, I would argue, just to kind of throw things out there. He has a response about how all models are wrong, and I think some are useful. That quote actually has been misquoted from a bunch of people, but I believe it comes back to George Box. And there's even speculation it might have come before him, but that's more or less where a lot of people agree it started. There's things like the Box-Jenkins method. So that is where he has really impacted my career. So anyone knows ARIMA modeling and time series, it's just super fascinating. But autoregressive and moving average components with integration. So integration is the middle piece. That's the differencing for stationarity. The autoregressive moving average pieces are two other pieces that do like seasonality and cyclicality. And it puts it on this really nice, neat package. And it's beautiful. It works out beautifully, especially when you start adding in exogenous variables, which I think is where most people think ARIMA sucks. And then when you figure out you can add in exogenous variables, and it really just turns into a formulaic mathematical structure, which is how I view it a little bit differently than most. It becomes very fluid and flexible, and it's amazing. And I made a lot of money at the beginning of my career just doing this. I was just building out time series models at my first job. Went to the second job working in consulting. Again, I sat in New York City at like 1 a.m, helping one of the world's largest global banks fix out models they had problems with. They had to deliver the next day to the regulators. And we were like, smashed, like trying to hurry and get through all this. And like, just crazy busy trying to finish up this work and paperwork. And again, my expertise in this area came from, again, this Box-Jenkins methods here. Other things he's known for, again, there's a whole list if you go on Wikipedia here, which is what I'm looking at. There's the Box-Cox transformation, Box-Tidwell transformation, Box-Binkin design, Box-Cox distribution. I might have already said that, but Box-Muller transform, Box-Pierce test, Box's M-test, the Young Box test. And there's a few other ones on here as well. But he's probably one of my favorite statisticians, and the fact that he's worked in so many areas. So his impact and reach has covered things from quality control, time series analysis, design of experiments, and Bayesian inference. So everyone gets really excited about Bayesian. And, I haven't found a lot of great uses for it, and I haven't spent a lot of time actually doing it because there are other better methods out there, I feel. But again, everyone gets really excited today as if it's like this really new, groundbreaking thing. And yet, you look at his time, George Box made some good contributions in these kind of spaces as well here. So I think, again, what made him a legend was just the unique ideas, the transformation of statistics from kind of this really dumbed down, simplistic thing. And of course, as data has become more and more relevant, I think we have more and more useful tools. But again, a lot of his work was done, much, much earlier, like in the 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s. And so when you really start to look at this, again, he's kind of standing out as a cutting edge individual. There's also a picture of him, which I know you won't see on the podcast here. I'll try to put it up here. I'm sure it's copyrighted, but I'll put it up. It's just like this picture of him when he's older and he looks so happy. I just imagine him as like this great professor as well. Again, I don't really know. I haven't looked into his professorship, but what made him a legend, what made him a legacy is, again, again, all of his methods, his models, things that are, he developed and, thought about and really designed, they're still being used today. So I think part of the legend title of, being a legend is having something that can live across time. It's not like you come up with this, model for trading stocks and making money for a firm, and then it doesn't work a week or two later, which for a lot of us that are in the quant space, like the buy side is not that exciting for us. Yeah, you could make more money, but a lot of what you're doing is just fitting and refitting models. There's not a lot of in-depth thought. This kind of goes into the final conclusion here in a second, but it's about adding value more or less to the kind of, the canon here, like adding more to the actual literature, adding to the continuation of the industry as a whole. It's not, I made a bunch of money and I traded some stuff and none of it works anymore because I caught a fluke. Again, I don't think many of these people make, I don't know, maybe there are people, like, I guess people consider legends that are in the investing space because they made a lot of money. But again, being able to add value, I think further on above and beyond your own personal profits, is something probably more valuable, more meaningful to add to a legacy here. And then finally, I just want to mention John Nash. One of my favorite movies is A Beautiful Mind, which of course is all about John Nash. He's known for the Nash equilibrium. And I believe it's him. If it's not him, it could be someone else on this list here. But when the Nobel Prize was delivered, they were like shocked they got the Nobel Prize for whatever they announced they got the Nobel Prize for. And I think a lot of this kind of plays into that legend, like kind of that legend atmosphere. And, what makes you a legend is often what people think you're great for. Often what is like the most groundbreaking piece about you, I think, is what you probably don't think is the best or the greatest for yourself here. So I don't know. If you would have went back and asked Peter Carr, for example, like what makes you, Peter Carr, what makes you so influential in the industry? I think he would have had a really humble answer, but I think a lot of it would have come down to, perhaps some of his papers and his research and kind of works and stuff like that. But I think a lot of it actually came down to his people skills, which was quite amazing in the space that we're in. I think, again, if it was John Nash or someone else, maybe, I don't know who else, somebody else that was famous that's, I guess, not on this list, but somebody else like John Nash, where it's like you get the Nobel Prize and you're like, I've done all this excellent, amazing work, and yet I'm remembered for this one thing. I think maybe it sounds a little ungrateful, but at the same time, that's what makes you, I think, a legend, is the fact that you have not just done one thing, right? A lot of people think like, oh, this person went out and did this one thing. There's often a lot of work that builds up to that point, a lot of contributions to that kind of industry here. So like with Rick Rubin, I think if he would have had one all-star, I don't know, musician or someone come out of it and that was it, I don't think he would be a legend. I mean, he's still alive, but he wouldn't be who he is today. Being able to replicate that over and over again. And I think we see that with everybody on this list. I mean, you go back to Fischer Black. Again, he had all kinds of publications, like the Black Derman toy model, which is another example of models in the quant finance space. Again, the way he kind of shifted and moved Goldman Sachs, changing some of, I guess, how their quant teams are structured and ran and put together. You look at Peter Carr, again, changing the industry a lot through the way that NYU is structured and put together. So for those of you that don't know, the quant program at NYU Tandon, the one that he was running, he just did some very unique things with the program in the sense that they were trying to diversify the amount of topics covered. Many other programs have tried this and have failed miserably because their programs are not large enough. Again, but Peter somehow was able to put all these pieces together. He had a great network and was able to pull in industry practitioners and have them help teach classes on topics that weren't being taught in other programs here, which I hope NYU continues on with something similar to this. But again, and then you look at like Rick Rubin, we mentioned, Fischer Black, Gil Strang, again, publishing multiple books, doing all these online lectures, again, good lecture after lecture after lecture, and just really contributing in the sense that these individuals are doing good work consistently over time. And so it wasn't like they did one thing. It wasn't a one-trick pony here, right? They were actually creating a legacy, like a big, portfolio of value they've added to society and to specifically their industry or kind of circle that they're kind of running in here. And that leads me kind of to the final conclusion of this, which is thinking about, how do you leave, behind a kind of a legacy here? You want, at least you may, I don't know, maybe you don't want to, but I would like to leave behind something more than just, Dimitri, Bianco, father, husband, guy that made YouTube videos and worked at a few banks, right? You want to leave something behind even more here. And this kind of struck me when I was in New York City, I think it was last year sometime. I met up with a subscriber for dinner when I was there doing some recruiting at some of the schools there. And we were walking and they said, Dimitri, you've made a massive impact on the quant finance industry like no one else has done. And I'm sitting there looking at them like it's flattering. Like, thank you. I mean, I appreciate it. I've done quite a bit here. And they said, no, seriously, think about this, right? A lot of other people have published papers. And that's what the piece I think that's missing from a lot of my resume with this is that I'm so busy actually building models to make money, kind of as I mentioned before with the buy side here. Often we got caught up in like, Dimitri, build model to do this. Okay, that model doesn't work as well anymore. You know, the market's changed. Build new model to do something else. I often don't have time to write down thoughts, ideas, processes. Like even at firms, I've developed things that I would say are fairly groundbreaking or unique or different. They're gone. They're lost. Like the firms don't track a lot of this. They don't even know. I mean, I could give them a gold mine, some sort of, groundbreaking piece here. But again, they don't really care because it's not money making in venture. It's more academic and focused, which is kind of the quant space here. And I think that's the piece I'm really missing here, which I think a lot of you should think about as well, is should you spend more time making money, building up departments and firms? Again, there's, I guess, more of this people side like we see with Peter Carr where you're building relationships. So even for myself, like I have an invisible support network around me. Like I don't know if it'll catch me, but when something bad happens, I do have points of contact, people I kind of reach out to. And it's like, I quit my job last year. I'm sick of this. I don't want to work in, banking anymore. I'm just taking a break. I need a breather. I need something new. I need something refreshing. And it was nice to have people kind of jump in with that. But again, doing the career and the networking piece is kind of part of what makes a legacy behind you. And what this individual was talking about with YouTube, I was kind of asking him about, like, what do you mean you think I'm unique here? What do you mean you think I'm contributing to the quant finance space here? And they're like, no. You got to realize there's really no one out there that's providing good, solid advice, that's assisting as many people as you do. I know you answer tons of emails and comments, and like you've emailed me back and forth quite a bit. You're taking time out to go to dinner with me tonight. Like you're really impacting the industry in the sense that you're helping to lay, the next generation. And I guess when I think about that, I look back on that, I think, okay, that's kind of the Peter Carr attribute here. This is the, it's not very common to see people on YouTube making quant finance videos. It is extremely rare that you would email someone in the quant finance space, regardless of who they are, and they would respond back with help, career advice. Even when you have stupid questions, like I get some pretty dumb questions and I get some pretty combative people like, oh, Dimitri, like quant finance isn't that great, but explain to me why it's better than finance. And I'm just like scratching my head, like it's not better. It's different here. And they go, well, which one makes more money? And then it's like, you're trying to answer that question. And then they're jumping through to some other question. And there's some annoying people out there. Most of you are great though, so don't take that as a negative here. But they're just kind of mentioning that. I think that's the piece, being able to help the community, being able to help students. Like you're a student. I'm not getting anything out of this deal. It's not as if like I help you and then you're paying me, or I help you and you give me a job, or these are things that might happen, I guess, in the future at some point. I mean, I'm sure some subscriber now who's like a young kid might end up working somewhere and need someone to do something, and I end up working for them. Like you never know how these things turn out. But at the end of the day, I think that's the Peter Carr aspect of this here. Now, the piece that I am missing, the piece that I'd like to spend more time on, but I just don't seem to have the time to do it. I think this is, again, where legends are so rare, is it's because it's hard to do. It's hard to build a legacy here, is being able to do solid informatic work here, some sort of research, some sort of piece here that really contributes to the industry as a whole. Doesn't have to be super academic-y work here. I've been debating on doing just more like lessons or teaching structures. Like I would love to write a book. Like it's in my wheelhouse. I would love to write a book. But again, it's one of those things that it takes a lot of time. And unfortunately, where I'm at in my life, again, I don't have that sort of time to do these sort of activities. But I think that's what I'm looking at from a legacy kind of perspective here, is that looking back and thinking, okay, I want to make a large impact on the industry. I want to change the way things are done. I want to improve it in some sort of way here. And if you can move the needle enough as an individual, again, it takes a whole team behind you to do this. Every single person on this list, there's people that have helped them, that have worked with them. But again, there's something unique about every individual on this list as well, where they can do things that other people cannot do here. And so I think that is what really makes a legend, is not that everyone does some sort of similar thing. It's that they do something that's unique and challenging, but at the same time, it has a really clear equation, I guess I'll say, like a line of thought that gives back to the community. So whether you're developing model frameworks like George Box, like the Box-Jenkins, or Fischer Black's, Black-Scholes model, or John Nash's Nash Equilibrium, or you're kind of helping build other people into legends themselves, more like Rick Rubin or Peter Carr, right? You're, again, supporting, you're still doing legendary work, you're still contributing to these successes, but your strength here is more or less that piece that's kind of gluing all of this together. Now, again, those two individuals have both done, outstanding work in and of themselves, but they seem to have this different kind of attribute here in like working with people and getting people, bringing the best out of people and themselves, I should say. So anyways, those are my thoughts on Legends Never Die, how to build a legacy here. Thanks for listening. If you found this helpful, interesting, please do subscribe or share it on any social media platform. That does a big help for me. So anyways, until next time.